And to discuss the steps that are being taken forward to satisfy these requirements that have been perhaps recommended by Brussels, we now welcome Associate Professor of Law, Jowanka Jakubek, Lalik from the University of Warsaw. Thank you very much for joining us at TVP World.
Thank you for the invitation.
So the coalition government wants to satisfy doubts that Brussels may have concerning the rule of law in Poland, and there is this pre-agreed deadline of June the 9th. How will the coalition government make this happen?
Well, it is a big challenge for sure for the Polish government to satisfy the requirements of the EU and when it comes to the rule of law. And also the deadline for meeting those requirements is very short. We need to understand that the demolition of the rule of law in Poland has been going on for 8 years, which means that also some time is needed for the rule of law to be re-established in Poland. So also what is another important factor to be considered is that when we want to restore the rule of law, we need to also kind of comply with the rule of law. So we need to follow step by step all the legal requirements in order to reinstitute all the important legal provisions.
Right, and in order to do that, legislation, right, will have to go through, and of course legislation, in order for it to go through, needs to be signed by the president.
Precisely.
So how is that factor? I mean, we all know that President Andrzej Duda sympathizes with the former ruling party, the Law and Justice Party. So how is the ruling coalition now going to be able to get some legislation through in order to make these reforms happen, especially as you mentioned, such a tight time frame?
Well, President Andrzej Duda made it clear that he is not in favor of the political program of the current government when it comes to the judiciary and reforms of judiciary. And he's not willing to sign any acts of parliament that would re-establish those kind of principles. So I think it will be very challenging to actually convince him to sign acts of parliament. And for the time being, the government, especially Minister Adam Bodnar, tried to find other legal instruments that could be used in order to cure this situation. For example, some internal acts of law were used or some resolutions of the parliament, which of course they do not have this kind of binding force as the act of parliament. However, in specific certain situations, they can be used to, let's say, reintroduce some of the important legal principles.
And obviously most of these decisions and the practicalities of implementation lie with the Minister of Justice. Obviously the President has a lot to say here as well. But how will this practically happen by the 9th of June?
Well, Minister Adam Bodnar also, he has very substantial powers, which he kind of inherited from the previous Minister of Justice. Some of the powers are actually quite controversial, to be honest, because when we kind of look at the constitutional point of view, some of the competences, current competences of the Minister of Justice are quite broad. And also Minister Adam Bodnar, he made this kind of statement that he will try to limit those kind of competences by using them in accordance with the principles of the rule of law. Which means that, again, it will take some time to re-establish this order, especially in the judiciary. But let me give you one example. When it comes to the presidents of the courts, the Minister of Justice has substantial powers to appoint them, but these powers can be deemed quite too broad, and therefore Minister Bodnar declared that he's not going to make this decision himself, but he will ask the judges which work in the courts to elect the president of the court, and then he will be able to appoint this person as a president of the court.
Just going back to something you said earlier, you said that over the last 8 years, the rule of law has been demolished. So obviously, perhaps for our viewers who might be abroad, it sounds quite dramatic. It might seem as though there has been absolute chaos here in Poland, which obviously it hasn't been the case. So could you just give us maybe an example or two as to perhaps what that means? Okay. What has been happening over the last 8 years in comparison to perhaps what should be changed or what will be implemented now?
Okay, so let me explain that the principle of the rule of law means that all the authorities need to act in accordance with the law and on the basis of the law, and also within the limits of the law, which means that we have the constitutional legal order, which needs to be respected, also the balance of powers, also the checks and balances system, which competences belong to different authorities, and any authority that is acting within their competences cannot really exceed those competences. And unfortunately, that was the case for the last 8 years, which means that currently there is a big challenge to reinstate those principles and really to limit the competences and also limit the acting in accordance to these competences for the public authorities.
And what would you say is the absolute number one priority?
Well, first of all, to try to re-establish and to reinstate the trust in the judicial system in Poland. I think that was one of the most important challenges. The first step would be the Constitutional Tribunal. We need to reinstate the Constitutional Tribunal as a professional working body, which is going to be overseeing the legislative activity of the parliament in accordance with the constitutional principles. With Constitutional Tribunal and then what needs to be especially done is to look at the work of the courts and the Supreme Court. So those the judicial branch of the government needs to be also reformed in accordance with the constitutional principles.
Restoring the independence of the judiciary, right? One of the fundamentals of democracy is going to be a priority. And is a priority right now, but if we look at the timeline by June 9th, why does it need to be done so quickly?
Well, there is a roadmap agreed with the European Commission, and this roadmap needs to be actively looked after by the Polish government. And also what is important is the date of the European elections. So the European elections are going to happen in June, and this is also an important deadline. So the European Commission can also look at the activities of the government. What I also need to explain is that the first steps in relation to, for example, granting the EU funds to Poland were also done based on the mutual understanding and mutual trust from the side of the European Commission and the Polish government. So I think that also after those declarations, some actions must happen in order for the European Commission to see that the rule of law is actively restored in Poland.
Indeed. Okay. Perhaps we can have a look at this statement that came out from the Deputy Minister of Justice, Krzysztof Śmiszek, because he actually had a press conference earlier today.
Proof of our co-responsibility for normalizing relations with the European Union are the draft bills prepared by the Ministry of Justice that will restore the rule of law in Poland. The bill on the National Judiciary Council has been adopted by Parliament, and the bill on the Constitutional Tribunal is being discussed by Parliament today. Proceedings will continue over the next weeks, and I hope that it will come into force soon. After 2 months of hard work at the Justice Ministry, something that had been the greatest disgrace of the past 8 years was reversed. We've unblocked 139 billion euros, and we ended this foolish war with the European Union. We showed a pathway for the restoration of the rule of law in Poland.
Okay, based on what we hear, I'd like you to comment on what Mr. Śmieszek just said, but also I'd like to ask about Hungary taking over the European presidency and whether it has any influence on this timeline.
When it comes to Deputy Minister Śmiszek, he explained that the priority of the government, of Ministry of Justice, is now to put in place the legislation which will preserve the rule of law principles, and so again the constitutional tribunal aspects and the Supreme Court and the ordinary courts needs to be again reinstated in accordance with the principles of legality and rule of law. When it comes to Hungarian presidency, indeed Hungary, as we know, is the, let's say, the difficult partner now when it comes to the rule of law, and some really basic aspects of the rule of law are also not working currently in Hungary. So I think it can play a political, let's say, it is a political factor in this process, which is also taken into consideration. I think the European Commission is aware that as soon as Hungary will take over the presidency in the European Union, it might be more challenging, more difficult to, for example, negotiate or to discuss those kind of legality principles with the Hungarian government.
Is there hope? I guess that's my next question. Is there hope that the reforms that were instituted by the Law and Justice Party can be rolled back before the next presidential elections here in Poland?
To some extent, yes. However, I would be quite careful in being too optimistic, because again, if we want to reinstate fully the rule of law, we need to do it according to the rule of law, as I just explained, which means by the acts of parliament. So if the president is indeed going to oppose the acts of parliament, if he's not going to sign them, if he's going to veto them or send them to the constitutional tribunal, which is currently, again, not in favor of those kind of legislative principles, I would say that it's going to be a big challenge. However, I believe that slowly, step by step, the rule of law can be reinstated.
Okay, on that note, we're going to wrap up our conversation. Dr. Jowanka Jakubek, Lalik, Associate Professor of Law at the University of Warsaw. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.